All right, so today we're diving deep into something pretty fascinating. The 80-20 rule. Have you ever felt like you're putting in so much effort, but you're just not seeing the results you want? Well, this principle might just change your entire perspective.
It's intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah, we're going to break down how 80% of our outcomes often come from just 20% of our efforts. And we're using a whole bunch of articles and discussions and even real-life examples. We're even going to see how this rule applies to your wardrobe, your relationships, even your path to happiness. Get ready for some serious aha moments.
And what's so interesting about this principle is that it's not some new age idea. We're talking about the Pareto principle observed way back in the 19th century by Vilfredo
The
Pareto.
19th century. Okay, so tell me about it.
Well, he noticed something interesting in his garden. 80% of his pea pods were coming from just 20% of his plants.
Pea pods. Wait, this is already way more interesting than I thought it would be.
And it didn't stop there. Pareto started seeing this 80-20 ratio everywhere. He observed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by just 20% of the population. It really highlights how imbalanced input and output can be.
So it's not just about gardening. It's about seeing that a small amount of causes often lead to a large amount of effects.
Right, exactly. And even though the 80-20 ratio isn't a hard and fast rule, it's a really useful way to look at how we're working towards our goals. Let's imagine you're a student who's trying to get the best grades. Think of it like choosing a path. You could put in very little effort and get not so great rewards, like if you were cramming at the last minute. Or you could work super hard but still not get the results you want. Like you go to every single lecture, but
Yeah.
nothing's really sinking in.
Okay, yeah, I can see where you're going with this. We definitely want to avoid those paths for sure.
Exactly. Now think about the path where you work hard and get great rewards. Attending every lecture and really studying hard, that definitely works, but it can be exhausting. The 80-20 rule is kind of like finding a secret shortcut.
Ooh, a secret shortcut. I like that. Tell me more about how we find this amazing path.
Well, think about it this way. Imagine you just focus on the most important lectures. You make sure you understand the main ideas. And maybe even look at old exams to figure out how to study smarter, not necessarily harder, you see.
So it's not about being lazy. It's more about being smart and focusing our energy on those high-impact actions. This reminds me of something we hear a lot about, goal setting. How can the 80-20 rule help us get to our goals in a more effective way?
Instead of trying to do everything at once, the 80-20 rule helps us get our priorities straight. Let's say you're working towards getting that online business qualification you've always thought about. It's about figuring out which parts of the course are most likely to be on the exams, or the ones that are most useful for your dream job.
I love that. It's like you're using a laser to focus on the most important things. But let's be realistic here. There are always those pesky time wasters that try to throw us off track.
That's true. We've all got those everyday distractions, like endlessly scrolling on social media or binge watching our favorite shows. But sometimes those time wasters are a bit sneakier. Sometimes it's other people, maybe even unintentionally discouraging us from going after what we want.
Oh, I totally know what you mean.
Yeah.
Sometimes those negative people can just zap your motivation.
Right. And then there's the classic trap. We say yes to way too many things that don't really matter, and then we're just exhausted with no time for the important things. Recognizing and dealing with these time wasters is key to freeing up our time for the things that actually make a difference. You know, that 20% we've been talking about.
You know, that makes me think about a Reddit discussion we found about how people are using the 80-20 rule in their everyday lives. It was full of really smart examples. One person mentioned how they use the 80-20 principle to figure out which 20% of their clients brought in 80% of their sales. It really made them reconsider how they were working with their clients.
What I find so fascinating is how this rule shows up in places you wouldn't expect. We see it in how software is developed. They focus on the 20% of features that provide 80% of the value. Or even in our relationships, figuring out which 20% of connections bring us the most happiness and support. It's all about choosing where we put our time and energy.
It's like you suddenly have a whole new way of looking at the world. You start seeing patterns everywhere. And it's not just about work and getting things done there. We found this blogger who talks about using the 80-20 rule to simplify her whole life, everything from her home to her happiness.
Simplifying your life, what does that even mean? I'm curious.
Well, for her, it meant getting rid of the clutter in her kitchen. She focused on the 20% of items she actually used regularly
Yeah.
and realized that most of her kitchen was full of things that were just taking up space, not actually adding any value to her life. She even used the 80-20 rule for her happiness.
Happiness. That's interesting. Tell me more.
She spent some time figuring out the 20% of activities that actually made her happy. Maybe it was spending time with the people she loved, or doing something creative, or even just going for a walk in nature. And then she made a conscious effort to make time for those things in her daily routine.
If we think about it in a bigger sense, it's about being intentional with our time and energy. It's about focusing on what truly matters to us and letting go of things that just drain us.
Exactly. She also talked about focusing on the relationships that were the most meaningful to her. It's a good reminder that we don't have to try to please everyone. Sometimes choosing to spend time with the people we truly care about leads to more happiness and stronger connections.
It's about quality over quantity, right? By focusing on the important few, we can unlock so much more in life. But it's not just about external stuff like things we own or activities. We also found this piece by Carlos Federazzi, and he takes the 80-20 rule to a whole new level. He's talking about things like peace of mind, cherished memories, even personal growth.
Now, this is where it starts to get really deep. He argues that 80% of our peace of mind might actually come from 20% of our daily habits. Things like mindfulness, spending quality time with loved ones, connecting with nature. It really makes you stop and think. What are those small but powerful things that really impact how we feel inside?
And he doesn't stop there. He suggests that 80% of our most cherished memories might come from just 20% of our life experiences. It's a beautiful way to think about those special moments, those connections, those adventures that shape who we are.
Okay, before we get too philosophical here, I want to make sure everyone listening walks away with some practical advice. We actually found a source that gives us 5 clear steps for using the 80-20 rule in our lives.
5 steps. Okay, let's hear them.
First, we need to take stock.
Uh-huh.
What are we currently doing that affects our decisions? Or might even be causing some of the problems we're facing? It's about getting everything out in the open.
Okay, so first we take stock. Then what?
Then we have to think about how each of our behaviors or habits is actually affecting things. Are they helping us get closer to our goals, or are they holding us back? This step requires some honest self-reflection.
Honest self-reflection.
Got it.
What's the next step?
Step 3 is where the real magic happens. This is where we start getting rid of distractions. We figure out when we're most productive, and we use the power of habit stacking. Have you heard of that?
Habit stacking. That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
It's basically about using small, consistent actions to make positive changes. So instead of trying to completely change your routine overnight, you focus on adding tiny habits to your existing routines.
Oh, I get it. So you're not trying to change everything at once. You're just building on what you're already doing.
Right. And once you've figured out those high-impact actions, it's time for step 4, setting boundaries.
Setting boundaries. That's a good one. What do you mean by that?
It's all about protecting your time and energy by saying no to things that aren't really that important.
That's probably easier said than done, though, right?
True. It's not always easy, especially if you're used to trying to please everyone or taking on too much. But setting those boundaries is essential to creating a life that feels both fulfilling and productive.
I agree. Setting boundaries is like giving ourselves permission to prioritize what truly matters. And finally, what's step 5?
Step 5 is crucial. Regular review.
So we have to check in with ourselves and see how we're doing.
Exactly. It's easy to get excited about a new strategy, but staying consistent is really important.
So we check in with ourselves and ask, are we still doing things that match up with our goals? Have our priorities changed? What's working well and what needs tweaking?
Exactly. Life's constantly changing. So it makes sense that our approach might need to change too. The 80-20 rule isn't about sticking to some strict formula. It's more like using this principle as a guide to make better decisions as we navigate life's ups and downs.
That makes a lot of sense. I like that.
So, we've covered a lot of ground today. From prioritizing and managing our time to personal growth and setting boundaries, it's pretty clear that the 80-20 rule is a powerful way to make more mindful choices in all aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. And I'm really looking forward to exploring even more in part 2.
Me too. I can't wait. But for now, we'll leave it there.
Sounds good. It's really interesting how those 5 steps can help us make smarter decisions in every part of our lives.
Right. And what I'm finding really helpful about this deep dive is that the 80-20 rule isn't just about working harder and being more productive. It's more like a philosophy for living a more fulfilling life in general.
Exactly. It's about making sure your actions match your values and focusing on what really matters to you.
And I think that's a really important point. It's not about finding one solution that works for everyone. We all have different things we want to achieve, different priorities, and different ways of working.
Of course. The great thing about the 80-20 rule is that it encourages you to become more self-aware, to understand your own patterns, and then make choices that fit your own unique needs and goals.
Okay, so we've talked about how the 80-20 rule can help us prioritize, streamline our work, and even simplify our lives. But how does personal growth fit into all of this?
Ah, that's where things get even more interesting. Remember Carlos Materazzi and his idea of applying the 80-20 principle to things like peace of mind and memories?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about his garden metaphor. What seeds are you planting? It really makes you stop and consider what you're nurturing in your life.
He even suggests that maybe 80% of our personal growth comes from just 20% of our experiences, habits, and even the people we choose to be around. It's a powerful reminder to be careful about the influences we let into our lives.
You know, that makes me think about times when I've felt stuck or uninspired. Maybe it's because I wasn't giving enough attention to those things that really nourish my soul and spark my creativity.
That's a great point. It's like we need to identify those growth catalysts, those specific activities or relationships that ignite our passion and push us forward.
So instead of getting overwhelmed by all the little things, the endless to-do lists, the social obligations that drain our energy, maybe we need to focus on those few vital things that truly light us up and help us become the best versions of ourselves.
I like that. And it's not always about adding more things to our lives, it's also about letting go. Sometimes decluttering our minds and emotions is just as important as decluttering our physical space.
That reminds me of something else Carlos mentioned, the importance of knowing when we're most productive. Those times when we're really focused and full of energy.
He's a big advocate for not just recognizing those peak times, but also fiercely protecting them. No distractions, just pure focused work on those high impact tasks that make a real difference.
I'll be honest, I struggle with that sometimes. I'm definitely a morning person. Those early hours are gold for me.
Yeah.
But what about those inevitable energy slumps we all have throughout the day?
Well, that's where being self aware really helps. Instead of blaming yourself for not being on all the time, embrace those natural rhythms, use those lower energy times for easier tasks, or just step away and recharge for a bit.
So it's about working with our energy, not fighting against it. That takes the pressure off, trying to be productive every single minute of the day.
Exactly. It's about finding a sustainable rhythm that works for you as an individual.
He also talked about habit stacking, which I find really interesting. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. It's about using the power of small, consistent actions to make positive changes. Instead of trying to overhaul your entire routine all at once, focus on incorporating small habits into your existing routines.
You know, that reminds me of when I was trying to start a regular meditation practice. I kept thinking I needed to set aside 30 minutes every morning, but I just never managed to do it. Then I tried habit stacking. I started with just 5 minutes of meditation right after I brushed my teeth. Because brushing my teeth was already a habit, it made it easier to stick with the meditation.
That's a perfect example. By connecting a new habit to an existing one, you're creating a trigger that makes it more likely you'll follow through.
And the great thing about habit stacking is that you can gradually build on those small wins over time. Maybe you start with 5 minutes of meditation, and eventually you can work your way up to 10 or 15 minutes.
Exactly. Small changes applied consistently can lead to amazing results.
Okay, so we've talked about peak productivity times, habit stacking, all great strategies. But what about setting boundaries? That feels like a really important part of protecting our time and energy.
Absolutely. Carlos talks about identifying the non-negotiables in your life, your core values and priorities, the things you're just not willing to compromise on. Maybe it's spending quality time with family, prioritizing your health, or pursuing a creative passion.
I think that's crucial in today's world. It's so easy to feel like we have to say yes to everything, social events, work commitments, volunteer opportunities. But if we're not careful, we end up sacrificing the things that really matter to us.
Right. And once you've identified those non-negotiables, it's about clearly and respectfully communicating your boundaries to others. This might mean saying no to requests that don't fit your priorities, or setting aside specific times for focused work or personal time.
I know it's not always easy, especially if you're someone who likes to please others or tends to take on too much. But setting those boundaries is so important for creating a life that feels both productive and fulfilling.
I agree. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's about honoring your own needs and creating space for the things that bring you joy and help you thrive.
So we've covered a lot here, from prioritizing and managing time to cultivating personal growth and setting boundaries. It's clear that the 80-20 rule is a really useful framework for making more conscious, intentional choices in every area of our lives.
Before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I want to emphasize one more important thing: the importance of regularly reviewing and reflecting on your progress.
Ah, yes. That fifth and final step. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of trying something new, but being consistent is key.
Right. It's about checking in with yourself every now and then and asking those important questions. Are my actions still in line with my goals? Have my priorities changed? What's working well? and what needs adjusting.
Life is always changing, so it makes sense that our approach might need to change too.
Mm.
The 80-20 rule isn't about rigidly following a formula. It's more about using it as a guide to help us make better decisions as we navigate life's ups and downs. Welcome back. It's time to wrap up our deep dive into this 80-20 rule. And I gotta say, I think we've uncovered some really valuable stuff already.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how such a simple concept can have such a big impact on how we think about our work, our relationships, our personal growth, pretty much everything, right?
While we were getting ready for this deep dive, I stumbled across a quote that really stuck with me. It was from some productivity guru, and they said, the 80-20 rule isn't about doing less. It's about achieving more with less.
That's a good way to put it. It's not about slacking off or cutting corners. It's about being smart and focusing our energy on the stuff that really makes a difference.
Yeah, and for me, that's the real power of this principle. It's not just about getting more things done. It's about creating a life that feels more balanced, more meaningful, and way less overwhelming.
I totally agree. It's about taking a step back and asking yourself, what are those activities that bring me the most joy? Which relationships really nourish my soul? What are the tasks that are really driving my success?
And maybe, just maybe, it's about having the courage to let go of all that stuff that's not really serving us. The clutter, the distractions, the commitments that drain our energy and hold us back from pursuing our passions.
This whole conversation has got me thinking about my own life. I recently decided to declutter my wardrobe using the 80-20 rule. And you know what? I realized I was only wearing about 20% of my clothes on a regular basis, so I just donated the rest. It felt so good to simplify my closet and make room for the things I actually love.
That's a great example. It just goes to show how the 80-20 rule can be used in so many different parts of our lives, from our material possessions to our mental and emotional well-being. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final question to ponder. If you could pick just one area of your life where the 80-20 rule could make the biggest impact, what would it be? What's that one change that could unlock a whole new level of productivity, happiness, or fulfillment for you?
That's such a great question to think about. It might be about streamlining your workflow, prioritizing your relationships, or identifying those habits that really contribute to your overall well-being.
Yeah.
The beauty of the 80-20 rule is that it gives you the power to take control and design a life that truly aligns with your values and dreams.
And hey, even though this rule can be really helpful for focusing our efforts and making a bigger impact, it's also important to find some balance. Sometimes those little things, those trivial many, as we call them, they still hold a special place in our hearts.
Right.
Totally.
I'm talking about those fun hobbies, those spontaneous adventures, those little things we do just for the pure joy of it, even if they don't necessarily contribute to our big goals.
Exactly. Life's all about finding that sweet spot between being intentional and being spontaneous, between chasing our dreams and savoring the simple things.
Absolutely. So as you go out to the world, armed with all these insights about the 80-20 rule, remember to have fun with it. Experiment. Find what works best for you. And happy prioritizing.